One of the questions I get quite often is, Leah, how high should I raise that saw blade in relationship to the stock I'm cutting? If you've wanted to learn how to use a table saw, but you've just been too scared to try, well, in today's video, I'm going to show you what you need to do to gain the skills and go from cowardly to confident. Coming up next. Hi everybody, I'm Leah of seejanedrill, and if this is your first time here, can I just say welcome to you. We're a home improvement channel where beginners are welcome as well. Now at the top of the video I talked about this tool right here, and it's a table saw. I talked about the uneasiness that many of you have working with or being around a table saw. And I gotta tell you this, long before I was ever on television or on YouTube, I was a trades instructor. Yeah, that's right. I worked in the classroom with young pre-apprentices. And what I will tell you is this. If you're a little nervous about a table saw, well, you're not alone, because many of my students were a little shy about using this tool right here. Now in this video, I'm gonna get you over that hump. You're gonna go from cowardly to courageous, because I'm going to share with you the things that you need to do to keep yourself safe and also to operate the tool. So let's get started. When operating any table saw, make certain that you're wearing ear protection and eye protection. Make certain that you unplug your table saw if you're gonna physically be touching and handling the blade. Maybe you need to swap the blade out. Maybe you need to replace your riving knife with the guard. But if you're physically gonna have your hands on it, make certain that you unplug the saw first. One of the questions I get quite often is, Leah, how high should I raise that saw blade in relationship to the stock I'm cutting? And there are really two trains of thought. Number one, you can raise your saw blade significantly higher than the stock that you're cutting. And I want you to notice this. What that does is it increases a very steep saw blade arc. And what that means is that less saw blade is coming in contact with the wood you're cutting. You're going to wind up with a much better cut. You're not going to have burn marks on the side of your wood, and you're going to get less tear out. The second train of thought is what I always practice and what I used to teach my students. And that is just to allow a little bit of the saw blade like this here to protrude out the surface of the stock that you're cutting. Now, what that does is it decreases the steepness of the arc. What that means is more saw blade is going to come in contact with the wood. That wood is going to heat up, and you may get burn marks, or if you go too fast, you may get tear out. Now, the benefits to a lower saw blade are, well, God forbid your hand comes in contact with the saw. Now, you're going to get cut, but chances are you're not going to lose a finger. So it's really, really important when you're learning to use a table saw to have a consistent feed speed that's, that's smooth and forward. And then you're less likely to get, burn marks or tear out. A great addition to any table saw is a safety switch like this. This safety switch has the start button, the green button here, recessed. So you can't accidentally turn on your table saw without really intending to do so. Secondly, if you need to turn off your table saw very quickly and you don't have free hands, you can always use a knee or a hip. When you're operating a table saw, you'll want to make certain that your hands never get too close to this blade. You want to keep your hands at a distance of at least 4 inches. Never allow your hand to be in direct line with the blade. Be on one side of the blade or the other side of the blade. When you're feeding the wood through, it's a good idea to use a push stick. A table saw is really ideal for making rip cuts. And what a rip cut is when you're cutting a piece of wood that is longer in length than it is wide, and generally you're cutting with the grain. Now there's going to come a time when it's just not practical to use a push stick. Maybe you're cutting a large piece of plywood. And in this case, it's all right to feed the wood through the blade using just your hands, as long as you remember to keep your hands safely away from the blade. And this, of course, is a time when having an outfeed table is very, very important because the stock itself is so large. Once it gets to the end of the table saw, you want that plywood to have some place to land on. And that's why, well, having an outfeed table is a good idea. This tool right here, this is what's called a miter gauge. And a miter gauge, well, it tends to come with a table saw when you purchase a table saw. And what it allows you to do is it helps support the stock as you make a crosscut. Now, a crosscut is different than a rip. A rip tends to go with the grain, and a crosscut goes against the grain. Not only that, when you're cross-cutting wood, the stock tends to be wider than it is in length. A miter gauge, it's also adjustable. It allows you to pivot it to various degrees. Now, I'm going to set it here at 45, and we're going to make a 45-degree cut. Much like a miter gauge, a fence is adjustable as well, and it too supports the wood as you're making a rip cut. There are 3 things you never ever want to do with the table saw. Number 1, you never want to use your miter gauge and your fence in combination with each other. What that can do is it can cause a kickback in a hurry. What can happen is the wood, as you feed it through the blade, it can get pinched between the fence and the blade and then start to turn on you. Once this wood turns, you're in big trouble because it can get caught on the back tooth of the blade and kick it right back at you. Now, the reason a kickback is so dangerous is because that wood is coming at you at an incredible speed of 120 miles an hour. So imagine if you get a kickback and it's a large piece of lumber. If it hits you, you feel it. Number 2, you never want to try to cut a warped piece of wood on a table saw because that too can cause a kickback. And 3, you never want to freehand cut a piece of wood on a table saw. And what I mean by that is you don't want to feed that wood through the blade unsupported. You want to use at least a miter gauge if you're making a cross cut. If you're making a rip cut, make certain that you use your fence. That's what it's there for, to feed that wood through. Now, beyond the do's and the don'ts and techniques that I've shared in this video, there's equipment on your table saw that helps prevent a kickback. And on this table saw, it's a riving knife. That's what this is here, and it prevents the wood from catching on the back of the blade as you feed it through. Now, this is a guard that you find mostly on household table saws, but it does the same job that a riving knife does. It helps prevent kickbacks. So never take your riving knife or your guard off your table saw because, well, they're there to keep you safe. Now, if you're thinking about purchasing a table saw, you'll want to watch this video first. This is Leah saying you can do this.